This story didn't happen to me. Rather, my father told it to me about an incident that happened to a man even older than him whom he knew back in the day. That man was about 64 years old when he told my father the story, and the incident took place when he was around 50. We'll call him Don Julio. Don Julio lived in the countryside of northern Argentina, a little over 5 kilometers from the nearest small town. Every day, he would go to visit his son Francisco, who lived about 1.5 kilometers from his house. Imagine doing that every day, walking back and forth along those narrow paths where anyone would get lost before even reaching the halfway point. One of those days, he was running late on his way back from his son's house. He usually returned home before sunset, but that day he was walking through the woods in the dark, guided only by moonlight and a flashlight he carried with him, passing over a dip in the terrain where an old river used to flow. Then he heard footsteps crunching through the dry leaves and branches, and immediately saw that they were tracks from wild boars, or, as many call them, jabalis. That day he had brought his rifle with him, certain he'd hunt something that morning to share a barbecue at his son's house, but he hadn't managed to catch anything. Now, however, the opportunity presented itself. He crouched down and crept as quietly as possible. An older man with years of hunting experience, catching a wild boar would be no problem. He hid behind some bushes, and there he saw them. About 30 meters away from him, hidden in some bushes, were about 10 of them. That's what he saw at that moment. He was getting ready to take aim when suddenly he sensed someone or something behind him. The thing grabbed him from behind and lifted him off the ground. Many would speculate that it was a bear that grabbed and lifted him, but the fact is that there have never been bears in that area or in those places. He did everything he could to free himself, thrashing his body in all directions like a fish out of water, hurling every possible insult at the thing that was holding him. With his hands, he could feel that it was as cold as a stone, and he couldn't even turn his head to look to either side to get a glimpse of what it was, as if his neck were stiff, forcing him to look straight ahead. Just then, he felt himself being flung upward as it let go, and his head slammed into a large tree branch, knocking him unconscious in the middle of the woods in the middle of the night. That morning, as his son went about his routine, his father didn't come to visit him as was customary, but he wasn't worried, thinking his father would arrive a little later than usual. But several hours after noon, he grew concerned, thinking his father might have fallen ill after returning home that night. He went to look for him, and halfway there, he found his rifle lying on the ground, which struck him as odd, so he quickened his pace. When he arrived, he found something that left him frozen in horror. His father was lying prostrate in bed with makeshift bandages, his entire head covered in blood that pooled on the floor. His father, barely able to speak, explained what had happened. When he got up after that blow, he hadn't felt anything, just a little cold. His body, staggering through the gloomy woods, had managed to make it home when he realized he had a large wound on his head. As best he could, using some bandages he had, he wrapped his entire head to stop the bleeding. But in an instant, he felt exhausted and collapsed onto his bed to rest. He was freezing, shivering, and felt weak. He said that thing spoke to him while he was sleeping, calling out to him. His son didn't hesitate and went to find a healer he knew, one who had cured him of fright when he was a child. When they returned to his father's house with her, she began performing a strange ritual and whispering words while making a strange ointment from some plants and other items she had brought to treat the wound on his father's head. As soon as she finished, his father fell into a deep sleep, and they bandaged his head again. That healer spoke to me when it was over and told me that if I had arrived just one day later, my father wouldn't be here, that thing wanted to take him away at all costs. no matter what. She, like many people in the countryside, said it was the devil who likes to take those who walk alone through the woods. She told me that my father was a very strong man, which is why he held on and was able to make it home. But if I hadn't arrived, that thing would have taken my father away. I've been trudging through these northern mountains for almost 50 years. I know every ravine, every thorn bush, and every watering hole. But the woods at night, are something else entirely, son. You have to have a sacred respect for them, because the darkness there weighs so heavily that it makes anyone's knees go weak. And that night, I swear to you, I was this close to not making it out alive. I was trotting back, already late. The sun had already sunk behind the hills, and evening was closing in on us. I just rounded up the cows from the woods to put them in the camp pens, right there near the river, so they could spend the night safe. The mist was rolling down from the peaks, thick, like a white poncho covering the carob trees. Suddenly, my horse pricked up its ears and snorted. Horses sense danger before you do, you know. Amid the thick fog, I began to hear a rustling, a heavy crackling of dry branches way back in the thicket. The first thing I thought was, it's a lion. One of those early morning pumas that come down to look for a tender calf in the corrals. The cows had already sensed it. They were huddled against the posts, trampling over one another, letting out a bellow of pure terror that sent chills down my spine. I reached for the revolver I always carry in my waist. I dismounted slowly, stepping softly on the leaf litter, and crept toward the corral, crouched low, making use of the moonlight that occasionally cut through the fog. But when the clouds parted completely, my blood ran cold. That thing that was there, it wasn't just any feline. It was the very legend the old folks used to tell me about when I was a kid. The living myth of the land, the lobizin. It was crouched by the woodpile in the corral, an enormous skeleton with fur as black as a wolf's muzzle, rough, and two eyes as red as burning embers that pierced straight into mine. It wasn't the gaze of a country animal. Inside those eyes lay pure Christian malice. My hand was shaking. I won't lie to you, but after so many years in the wilderness, you don't just back down like that. I raised the gun, aimed right between its red eyes, and pulled the trigger. Boom! The flash blinded me for a second. When the smoke cleared, the beast let out a terrifying screech, a scream that wasn't of this world, and dove head first into the thickest part of the woods. I cursed like hell. I felt a tremendous bitterness, thinking I'd missed it. I went over to the corral to calm down the livestock, which was going wild. That's when I saw it, stuck to the carob post. Fresh, dark blood dripping down the wood. And right below it, on the ground, a piece of a hairy, bloody ear. I hadn't missed. I'd torn that piece off the damn thing. A few minutes later, high up in the mountains, a long howl rang out. It wasn't a dog. It wasn't a wolf. It was a human wail mixed with a rage that made the very ground tremble. I knew right away that scumbag was going to want revenge. So I didn't saddle up to head back to the houses. Right there, next to the corral, I built a makeshift fire with whatever I could find. I sat on the haystack with the loaded revolver tucked into my skirt, staring straight into the dark mist. I didn't get a single wink of sleep all night. I stayed there, defiant, waiting with my finger on the trigger to see if that devil would dare step into the light of my embers again. That's how I stayed, steady as a post, fighting off the fear until the sun finally began to rise over the mountains. This story is entirely my own. There are details that time has erased because I was very young back then, just a child, but the fear is seared into my memory and it won't fade even on the day I'm called to leave this world. My family and I had gone to visit my godmother in the countryside. She and my uncle had everything: cows, goats, crops. I loved visiting them. It was paradise by day, but nighttime in the countryside is a whole different story. That particular night, everyone had gone to sleep, and I stayed in bed a little longer, playing with a little toy airplane I had. Just then, I felt an urgent need to go to the bathroom. Here I need to pause. The bathroom wasn't inside the house. It was outside, tucked away in the backyard, about 20 meters away through the darkness. For a kid my age, making that trip at night was like crossing purgatory itself, but I couldn't hold it any longer. I mustered up the courage I didn't have and set off. I did my business quickly, my heart pounding. As I came out, just as I was about to head back to the bedroom, I heard a sound that made my blood run cold. It was like a hiss, a loud whoosh, just like the sound snakes make. I thought the worst. It's a Aurora. I slowly turned my head toward the side of the bathroom, and there I saw them. In the dim light, a pair of red eyes peered out. But it wasn't just one pair. There were several, and they were slowly creeping closer, taking their time. When the moonlight fell on them, my breath caught in my throat. They looked like rheas, those large birds, similar to ostriches, but they froze completely the moment the moonlight illuminated them. I stood frozen, terrified, in the middle of the courtyard. I didn't know whether to scream, cry, or run. There was a group of those creatures, enormous, towering, staring at me in deathly silence with those red, raisin-like eyes. They didn't behave like frightened animals. They were studying me. I don't know where I found the strength, but my legs responded. I turned around and dashed into the room like a gust of wind, closed the door, and burrowed under the covers, pulling the sheets up over my head, trembling and praying for the sun to rise quickly. The next morning, trying to find an explanation that would give me peace of mind, I approached my godmother while she was drinking some mead and asked her, as if it were no big deal, if she raised rheas or if they usually roamed the area. She looked at me strangely and told me no, that they'd never in their lives had rheas there and that none ever came near those parts. I didn't dare tell her what I'd seen for fear she'd say it was just one of my many childhood fantasies. But today, as an adult, I still think about that night. Animals don't just appear and disappear like that, nor do they look at you with that damned intelligence. I know very well what I saw in the darkness of that yard, and I keep asking myself, what kind of things were hiding beneath the form of those birds coming to find me? This is another experience I went through firsthand, and this time it wasn't a creature. It was something that defies physics and reason. On one of those quiet nights you only get in the countryside, my friend Joaquin and I were riding in the pickup truck. He was driving along the dirt road, and we were headed to town to pick up some supplies for the camp. I was looking out the window toward the horizon of the woods, where the vegetation begins to give way to open land. Suddenly, I spotted a light in the distance. At first, I didn't think much of it. I figured it might be a local walking by, or perhaps a hunter searching for tracks among the branches. The strange part came next. I look away, then fix my gaze back on the same spot, and the light was gone. A little while later, it would reappear. Out in the woods, that might be normal if someone were waving a flashlight, but after a few minutes, I noticed something that made me frown. Every time it reappeared, the light was getting closer and closer. Laughing, to break the silence in the cab, I cracked a joke with Joaquin, saying that the evil light was following us. That story so often told in our countryside, which many mock by saying there's no need to be afraid of it. But the joke stuck in my throat when I saw how fast that thing was closing in on us. I went on high alert. "Hey, Joaquin, a light is following us," I said, my voice now serious. Joaquin looked in the rearview mirror, realized something was off, and stepped on the gas. The truck started picking up speed on the dirt road, but that thing sped up too. It was right on our tails, son. It got as close as just 4 meters to the truck's bumper, while we were already going 80 kilometers per hour. I thought to myself, whatever it is, a car or a person, it's going to be blinded by all the dust we're kicking up in its face. But in that light, the dust didn't bother at all. It floated cleanly amid the dirt we were leaving behind. And that's when terror crept into the cab. Out of nowhere, that light began to make noises. It sounded like a horse snorting, and you could hear murmurs, people's voices, but very faint, as if they were muttering behind glass. In that moment of despair, I remembered what the elders always said. The evil light has 2 faces. If it's blue, like the one that was following us, it's the more peaceful one, the one that just seeks you out and accompanies you out of curiosity. But if that light turns a deep red, hold on tight, because that's the one that takes you away, the one that clouds your senses so you get lost in the thick of the woods, fall into a swamp or a marsh, and never come out again. Luckily for us, the light stayed blue. As we reached the final stretch, when we began to make out the first lights of the town, that thing started to fall behind and eventually disappeared again into the darkness of the open field. Joaquin, I didn't talk much about it that night, but we both knew that what happened back there wasn't a flashlight or any kind of natural gas. I saw with my own eyes that the stories about the countryside are true, and I still get goosebumps when I remember that blue glow floating 4 meters from the truck, whispering to us in the middle of nowhere.